Hello and welcome to everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the shortlist and longlist winners of She the People's first Women Writers Prize. Announced in November 2021, She the People's Maiden Women Writers Prize is an endeavor to create a platform for women writers from varied backgrounds to come together and raise their voices on issues that are important to modern Indian women. This annual prize comes after 7 years of organizing the Women Writers Fest, which has put the spotlight firmly on women writers and only women writers. So, I'd like to introduce the jury members. We have with us G. Sampath, writer and journalist, Preeti Gill, the editor and literary agent, and Lakshmi, who is the co founder of Aata Galata. So, my first question is directed to all of you. Since we are in the last leg of the prize, and so I would like to know what was your journey like since November when you were drowned in books?
Yeah, it was really a great experience for me, especially because the last 2 years haven't been really easy for most of us. And look, having a new book to look forward to, a fresh piece of writing every few days or every week, was one of the things that kept me going. And I have to say, it was really a great experience to be exposed to new voices, new styles of storytelling, new themes, and most of the writers are people I hadn't really been exposed to earlier. So it was a voyage of discovery that was really something positive in my life in the last few months. So I would thank the prize organizers for this.
And Lakshmi?
Yeah, as a co-founder of a bookstore, it's always a pleasure to be drawn by books, to be surrounded by books. But this is a very beautiful moment as all these books are by women writers. So this is a very special opportunity and it's a lovely moment. And as a woman, I have a resonance for all these writers. I have a resonance for their stories, for their themes. So I really thank She the People for this opportunity.
Well, you're welcome. Preeti, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I mean, I completely loved it. The fact of getting so many books all together, sitting with you, waiting to be read. I don't think there's anything quite like it. Since I live a life in books, this was really quite an experience. I also run a literary and cultural center in Amritsar. So
Okay.
for me, it was also an exposure to a lot of the new kind of writing that's coming out. All of it, opening up new vistas, new styles of writing, and generally providing so much exposure. So I'm grateful. Yeah, it was really quite a wonderful experience.
Since we are on the topic, I'd like to ask you, Preeti. There seems to be a gap in terms of the recognition male and women writers get. So, how do you think how much important it is to have an exclusive prize just for women writers?
So I don't think I really believe in making categories like that, because a good book or a good piece of writing will hold up. It doesn't need to be by a man or a woman,
Yeah.
and I don't really like making these boundaries or having like set areas. People always said that women wrote about the home and men wrote about politics and about ideas and stuff like that. So I don't think that these sorts of stereotypes are really true. I don't think they hold.
Yeah.
But having said that, I do think it's important that women's writing finds a place of its own in the sun. More women should write. Their work should be looked at seriously. They should be reviewed. And definitely, I think a prize is a fantastic idea. The idea that, I used to work with Kali for Women, for example, and Subhan later, so both literary and very feminist presses. It was always important that we should find the women's voice and be able
Yeah.
to tell the story from their point of view. So while I do think that is extremely important and it's extremely empowering and also gratifying, so it's a sort of a dichotomy. So you do not want to be labeled, you do not want it to be like a straitjacket. You want good writing, but at the same time, I do think it's important to have a prize that is solely for women and celebrates the kind of writing that is coming out today.
Okay. Sampath, do you have something to say about an exclusive prize for women writers?
Yeah, of course. I would question the assumption that there is a gap in recognition for male and women writers. As Preeti pointed out, I think good books have continuously been getting the kind of recognition, regardless of the gender of the author. But having said that, I would still assume that there is a strong case to be made for an exclusive prize for women, because if you take gender as a category, there is also a disparity within that category. When if you look at women writers who have got international or national recognition from India, I mean, there is scope for a greater representation there from different sections within that category. How many, for instance, how many Adivasi women writers have got such recognition? How many from Dalit communities have got? How many from the Northeast have got such recognition? So when you have a women's prize exclusively, you are creating a larger space for more of these writers to get into this conversation about literature, for their books to get noticed. And if they go on and win a prize, of course, their reach would expand exponentially. So, in that sense, I think having an exclusive prize does serve a really good purpose and more strength to Sridhar People's Prize.
Lakshmi, would you like to add to that?
I agree with that. I don't believe in stereotyping, labels, divisions, castes. As it is, everything is divided into a million pieces.
Yeah,
So I think it's important that writing is celebrated. So for that reason, I feel the feminine voice should be heard more. There should be more opportunities for them. They have a place in the sun, and more women writers should come forward. History can't be changed, but I think
yeah,
this is like a beautiful start, to give them more
yeah,
opportunities, to give them a platform for women to, address, tell their stories. So that is more important rather than talking about who's getting recognition and who's not.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, so when I started reading novels as a kid, there was always a special connection I made with the books that were written by women. Like the first time I read A Room of One's Own and Jane Austen, and all every in every genre, whether it was fiction, autofiction, thrillers. What do you think separates women writers from the male writers, or is there no distinction at all?
Okay, so I don't think between the covers of a book or on the page there is anything to distinguish a piece of writing by a woman from that by a man. I don't think there is anything which sets the two apart or differentiates them purely on a quality that derives from gender. But having said that, I can speak subjectively as a man
Yeah,
in this group. When I read, I find that in my experience there is a greater sense of intimacy that one feels towards the narrative voice, the way the narrative you relate to the narrative voice. I have seen it. It could be a pattern, but I've experienced that. And one way of looking at it could be if you look at in terms of the lighting or the color in a particular space. I would say in general, male writers, it's more of a bluish, whitish kind of a light. Whereas in certain or in many of the women's writers I have read, the narrative voice gives you or invokes in my head a yellow lighting. There's a difference in terms of tone, tonality, tenor that one feels. This is
yeah,
completely subjective. It may not be borne out by the experiences of other writers. And to me, this is a quality that I like and I enjoy and I do look forward to. So it doesn't really mean that women writers are a particular kind of writers, but in terms of subjective experiences, this is one thing which has appealed to
yeah.
me, and I do have quite a lot of favorite writers who for this particular reason.
Okay, Preeti, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think that when you read, you sometimes do it to understand something, about your own self, or to also recognize something that's within you. So, as a woman, I think that speaks to me because there is empathy, there is understanding, there is also a sort of a kind of almost like making a bond with the person who's writing and me as the reader, because I think there are shades that often one looks for when one is reading um, a book by a woman, because I'm a woman. But also that I feel that there is definitely much more interiority. There's a life of the mind, of the interior world. I mean, physically, yes, the home or relationships, and whether it's between daughters and mothers or siblings or husband, wife, all of that, of course, plays out. But I also think that women bring a lot more into the kind of writing that they do. So even when they're writing thrillers, for example, you will find a lot more of the descriptive aspect. So it's not just action, there is a lot more that's going on
Yeah.
in the head. I find that very interesting, because also it reveals to you the mind, what happens inside the head. So when you talk about the inner landscape or the inner courtyard, as it were, it is not only the courtyard of the family or the home, it's
Yeah.
also the courtyard of the mind. And that I find interesting. uh, I also feel that it's also a space where women are often pushing boundaries. They are talking about things that matter to them. It's not right to straitjacket them and say that this is a woman writing,
Yeah,
and
of
not.
course.
It's not right to say it's a Dalit voice or a Muslim woman's voice or whatever. But I do think that they're constantly pushing the envelope. They are constantly trying to talk about stuff that matters to them and in their world. And often they're doing it in very unique and very um, imaginative ways.
Mm.
So, also with the list that we got here, the books that arrived on our doorsteps, I think a lot of it was breaking out of stuff that one imagines women are writing about.
Mm.
So, in that way, yes, I do think that I really enjoy uh,
Women's
reading
writing.
it. Yeah, definitely.
And how is it for you, Lakshmi?
Yeah, I also wouldn't like to differentiate it as a man writing it or a woman writing it. But saying that, I feel that women's writings are more elastic. I would like to, define it a little further. Every time you read it, there's a different element. There is a note that you've missed, or a subtle voice behind that you've missed. So you feel like reading it again and again and again. It just draws you in. Maybe it's a personal prejudice as a woman reading women's writing. And another thing I feel, the best fiction by women, when you read it, they really make your mind and your heart larger. You open yourself up to listen to more things, you learn more things. You're setting yourself on a voyage of discovery. So you grow as a person. So I firmly believe in this, because I've grown up with a diet of Jane Austen. Every book has been like something that either I found out about myself, or something you would have gone till the end, and suddenly you would have missed something totally, and then gone back and read it all over again. It brings you enormous amounts of joy. So I would
Yeah.
like to say, in that way, women's writing is very special. In fact, I'm going to give you a very trivial example. It is not from the literary world. There is a movie called Eternals, which has been directed by a woman director. There was a lot of
Yeah.
controversy around it.
Chloe Zhao.
Yeah. So there is one particular shot. Normally, there are action scenes where the trucks get blown over, cars get blown up, all those things. In this particular scene, the truck just bursts out into leaves and flowers and beautifully falls on the ground. There's a certain beauty to it, and that is what women writers bring to literature. I know I'm saying it in a very
Yeah, but
layman's
that's
terms.
beautifully said.
Yeah, that's what I feel.
That's great. Preeti, since you brought up the long list and the variety of it, I just wanted to know what did you think of, since women's writing has, like, the books by women writers has often been typecasted as women's writing, they write about certain stuff, it's presumed. Since the considering the long list that came out and the number of submissions that went, what do you think of the variety and the narratives you've found in them?
No, I think thought it was extremely diverse in every respect that you can think about. So you
Yeah.
had very seasoned writers who had written many, many books. You had completely first timers who had brought out their very first books. You had translations and you had original writing in English. You also had some writers who are not with us anymore, but who've written this. There's a fantastic body of work, and that also was presented. So, in terms of just the sheer scope and the landscape that one was given was enormous. Within that, also the sorts of narratives and the kinds of storylines that came up again was really intimidating because of the vastness of the whole thing, and how do you try and make sense of trying to put them on a kind of a list together.
Yeah.
I think that so there were of course there was literary fiction, there were thrillers and murder stories, and there was a lot of mythology, there were even biographies, there were translations about fictionalization of real incidents that had happened. Through it all, there were a couple of threads, I think, which were very important because we've all gone through the pandemic. There was all of that also in some of the books. You saw that thread. And also for me, what was very important was also a sort of a political commentary on what is going on in the country, which I could see in many of the novels. And that really fascinated me because I think that the writer does have a role to play, and a sort of a, what shall I say, you're sitting in that place where you need to say what is going on around you. You cannot be this person who completely disassociates himself or herself from the world around. So, in so many respects, I thought that it was a very diverse list. It was a very wonderful list, and it opened up not only in terms of narratives, but the kind of writing styles that came, the kind of themes that were picked up, the stories that came to you from the diaspora, from large cities, from urban conglomerates, the others that came from you completely from rural hinterlands, even from just a lane, for example, in a city. So in every respect, I think whether it was language, whether it was the kind of structure of the book, all of it was vast. I don't want to take names right here, but
Yeah. We
it was
shouldn't.
really quite fascinating and enriching, and a huge learning, I think, also.
On the point of variety, which I think you had asked Preeti earlier, I would like to make the point that add to what I had said earlier about different kinds of voices coming into this space, where I had given the example of different kinds of intersectional identities which are important because they give it is what it is those identities which make the voices diverse. I mean, I gave the example of Dalit women writers and Adivasi women writers and voices and so on. The idea was not to separate out or divide anything. The idea was to basically point out the diversity of cultural influences, diversity of traditions, and all those find reflection in the short list, in the long list that we've talked about. We have had some fantastic stories about tribal women, which are really powerful. So those kinds of aspects, is, I think, are what were quite the key for me, at least in terms of the variety and the diversity and the experiences we get to read about, because for someone like me, for instance, who lives in the metropolis in an urban center, it's very difficult to get a hang of what life or experience or social context would be for someone living in a rural area, in a tribal village, or far away in a semi-urban setting. So in terms of diversity of experiences as well as diversity of perspectives and vantage points, I think this collection, this sort of short list and long list been have sort of really done well.
Yeah, I mean,
I
can I just add
also,
also, like,
yeah,
um, I think the idea is also to just, create space. So you have to have space for all kinds of writing to be figured, and to have sort of be constantly pushing the border, pushing the envelope to bring in, like Sampad just said, margins or whether it's groups of people or whether it's areas or languages that we have not looked at earlier. So, in that sense, I do think translations have been quite wonderful. Also, that we had quite a few entries in that. I mean, there were many translations also which made the long list, and also the thing is that we are at the end of the day obviously talking about human values, and that is something that binds all of us. So the stories are coming from all over the place. The Northeast for me being like really special, and so we did, had at least a couple of entries from there as well. And so exactly what Sampath was saying, that you're trying to also open the space up for different kinds of writing and different kinds of voices, especially voices which may have not been heard before or silenced for whichever reason, or just traditionally haven't come into the so-called mainstream. So yeah, I think it was quite wonderful in that way, the range that we managed to get to read.
How difficult was the shortlist to, form? How difficult was it for each of you? I think, do you want to take this first, Lakshmi?
I would say, like, I'm sure the three of us, it's not like we're friends and we come from different environments, and, you know, we here all gathered together to create this short list and the long list. And they have been different kind of experiences, as Sampath and Preeti have said. Some books leave us unmoved, some books dazzle us, some stories thrill us, some we want to keep going back to them. So, and it leaves you in a very difficult state of indecision, I think. It feels like you're put into a corner. It feels like they're giving you all the ice creams in the parlor and you have to choose like 10 flavors. So, you're taken back to a very, very difficult position. Everything seems tempting, and when you even choose one, you say, let me just put it down. You feel like, you've betrayed the other. It's such strong emotions when you take up books. So the process has been, I would say, it has been a very challenging one. And also the kind of books that were sent. As you said, there is so much variety, more power to women. And we had a challenge in our hands.
Sampath, what do you have to say? The difficulty of forming the shortlist.
Well, I mean, there is a saying, right? With power comes responsibility. So here you have the power to pick, and the responsibility is like crushing. You have to be. You know that you have to use this discretionary power which you have very judiciously, and also be sort of absolutely fair. So, I mean, I try to sort of go back and double check and see if I have been unfair. Maybe this one or that one. You try and sort of do it once or twice, 2 or 3 times, to make sure that this could not be any other way, because ultimately it's a subjective process. But at the same time, you are aware that it cannot only be subjective. You can't just be only partial to what you like, or what you are able to best rate to. You also have to take into account uh, plus factors, in terms of, is this particular narrative pushing boundaries or covering new ground in any way? And those other extraneous factors beyond your personal likes and dislikes as well. So I think in that sense, it was a learning experience and enriching experience, the process of selection as well. Yeah.
Preeti, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think it was sort of heartbreaking to have to choose, because there's so many of them that you would have liked to put on this long list, but sorry, from the long list also into the short list. But that's also because you like books because of certain reasons. That one book will appeal to you because of its language or structure. One book actually appeals to you because of the storyline and the narrative. In some, you like the character. Some you might like the locale, whatever it is. I mean, different books speak to you about different things. So it's really heartbreaking, I think, to have to whittle them down and make them into this kind of shortlist thing. But of course, at the end of the day, for me, content is king. And I do want a good story. I want a good story written really well. And even when it's a translation, and that I think is the most difficult part, because a lot of translations fall by the way, because somewhere along, when you're translating, you seem to forget that all the cultural nuances do not always have to come in, because it's a new readership, and we need to actually engage a completely new reader who does not know the original language. And so you do not have to really explain, because in that explanation a lot of it gets lost. So I mean, there are lots of things like that one with which you had to grapple as you were working on these books. And of course, it's a personal choice also, because it's the kind of story that will appeal to you, that you will ultimately decide upon, and the kind of writing that appeals to you. But like I said, for me, the narrative is important, the story itself is extremely important, and if it's well told, that's the winner.
Since we are almost at the end, I just want to ask you about, so English Indian literature is still fresh, and in the past couple of years it has changed drastically. Like, people are experimenting and everything. What do you have to say about the future of English literature? Sampath, I'd like you to take it first.
That's a. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question, but I can just share my. I don't know,
Yeah, just
my
your go.
thoughts on this. I think the future is definitely bright. I mean, I could see maybe point of a couple of things that really excite me. One is, of course, there is a greater democratization of kinds of voices and diversity of themes. I mean, if you don't, let's not talk about women's writing. If we talk about
Yeah,
fiction,
just
let's say fiction written by women writers that I have read, I would say that, see, up till about, say, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, I mean, a lot of the stuff I was reading had to do with women coping with the burden of patriarchal expectations, let us say. That was a predominant and recurring theme. But nowadays, when you see far more diverse kinds of themes and narrative styles, and one of them which struck me, for example, is there are a lot more quest narratives. I mean, it's not about a woman necessarily trying to liberate herself from patriarchal oppression. It's also about a woman trying to find herself. It could be a coming of age narrative. It could be an adventure narrative. There's tremendous amount of experimentation which is happening, not just in terms of form but also in terms of content. And very soon we'll be having writers who've grown up completely in the digital age. They're born after 2000, and that's really an exciting prospect, because you'll have completely different vantage point in terms of how they approach the world, approach the inner lives, approach what's happening around them. So I think it's a really exciting time for Indian writing in English going forward.
Lakshmi, your take is needed here.
Yeah, I feel like Indian literature in English is just blossoming now, and it's very exciting because in India, millions of languages are spoken. Every language has its own literature, and we still don't have, so many translations in English. There's still new stories to be found, new voices to be discovered, and to be brought out in English. There'll be interesting collaborations. There'll be interesting things to co-work together in this digital age. One is the digital platforms, the multiple platforms that have come out, and also the difference in voices. Like you write in your native language, somebody else translates. Somebody else brings it to you via audiobook. There's a huge journey. There is a huge process in this. So I think it's a very exciting time that's going to come up now, and it just started. So I'm actually looking forward to this.
Preeti, as a literary agent and an editor, what is your take on the Indian English literature?
The future of writing, of course, is bright, and we have so many more people writing, both men and women. And the diversity we've already just talked about the kinds of writing that is coming out, and even things like poetry, I think, is finding its place once again. So many more anthologies are coming on. There are so many more festivals that look at poetry as a serious occupation. Which sort of wasn't there earlier. Many publishers are giving space to poetry on their lists. So all of this, of course, is extremely positive and quite wonderful to look at. The only thing I wonder is about publishing itself. What is publishing? What's happening with publishers and what's happening in the publishing world? I mean, you saw what happened with Westland just now. Uh,
Yeah.
Amazon just shutting down like that. And every time as an agent that I talk to publishers and I take books to them, they don't want short stories, they don't want this, they don't want that, they want only, celebrity stuff. So I do not know where publishing is headed. Are we only going to be worried about the next bestseller, or are we actually going to be looking for that good book that speaks to us, that is honest and sincere, with good writing, with a good story, that actually talks to us about something that is important and critical to talk about? Or are we only going to look at chick lit, and are we only going to look at celebrities and their lives? So what is it that we want to read, and what is it that publishers are looking for their list? So while I think that the future of writing is bright, I do not know, I can't say anything about what is going on in the publishing world. And I'm sorry if that sounds not so happy, but
Yeah.
No, I would
that's how I
second
feel.
what Preeti just said. I think that's an important distinction to be made about the future of writers being dependent on two different things. One is, of course, their own talent, which is there, and the other is the ability of the publishers to be able to bring it out and showcase it. And I think Preeti has made some very legitimate points, which are of concern for writers and the writing community and the reading community today. I think we need to think about that and how we can sort of address that, perhaps.
Here's hoping that more and more publishers acknowledge new and flourishing writing in English Indian literature. Now that we've run out of time, I'd like to thank you, all of you, for joining me here. And once again, congratulations to the shortlist winners. The jury members recently decided on a shortlist of the prize, and the winners are A Mirror Made of Rain by Nahid Firoze Patel, A Redneck Green Bird by Ambai, Budhini by Sarah Joseph, Sisterhood of Swans by Selma Carvalho, The Begum and the Dastan by Tarana Hussain Khan, and What We Know About Her